Good evening and welcome to this evening's Cabinet meeting on Thursday the 9th of January. So we are not expecting any fire alarm testing today, and in the event of an evacuation, you will hear a recorded message requesting for you to evacuate the building. Please leave by the nearest exit and the Riviera Centre staff will assist you. Once outside, please assemble in front of the tennis courts to the seaward side of the building. Could I please ask that mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent? Thank you. Please note that we are live streaming this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel to encourage more people to engage in our public meetings. And please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and turn them off when finished. Can I just also, is my microphone still on? Yeah, that's good. Can I also say that as this is a cabinet meeting, but it is laid out as a council meeting, we will be operating this evening's meeting as a cabinet meeting. So there is opportunity for you to speak on more than one occasion if you wish to do so, and there will not be the requirement for you to stand. So please stay seated and use your microphone. Thank you very much. So move straight on with the agenda. Apologies for absence, please. Everyone is present, thank you. Minutes to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the Cabinet meeting on the 17th of December. Happy to move that from the Chair.
Happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. All those in favour, please indicate. That is unanimous. Thank you indeed. Item 3 is a disclosure of interest. If any member has a pecuniary or a non-pecuniary interest on any matter of this evening's agenda, maybe you'd be so kind as to declare that now. Thank you, non-declared. Urgent items, there are no urgent items apart from, of course, this one item which is agendaed, which is urgent. If you make sense of that, you're doing better than me. Okay, we'll move straight in to item 6, which is the English Devolution White Paper. So, just to try and set the scene a little bit of where we find ourselves at the moment. On the 16th of December, government published the Devolution White Paper. Certainly for government, it clearly sets out the direction of travel for local government, certainly probably for the next 50 plus years. And it's really been a bit of a marathon from the 16th of December because we went straight into Christmas. Christmas takes us to New Year, and we're here the first week of the new year, requiring us to give a decision to government on the 10th of January. In other words, tomorrow, if we wish to fulfil one of the requests that come forward in the white paper. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but let's first of all, what does the white paper state? What's it looking for? So it basically tells us that we can expect to see universal coverage of strategic authorities with directly elected mayors, clearly the national government's wish. New leadership structures will be introduced with more powers handed down from government to elected mayors and combined authorities to ensure that decision makers are directly accountable to local people. So a lot of people are saying, well, what are these new powers that are going to be handed down? So if you wish to care to read the 118 pages over Christmas, like some of us certainly did, let me just tell you what some of the local powers are that they are talking to be included. These include local tax retention, a proposal for regions to retain a larger share of tax revenue to be spent at a local level. regional investment funds, new powers to enable regional government to set up and control local investment funds, a return of the regional economic development agencies, powers around local housing policies to be able to set our own affordable housing targets, adjust planning regulations at that regional level, managing housing supplies, new powers to develop land use strategies. Regional transport authorities will have more control over transport infrastructure, including rail and bus services. There'll be an opportunity for the mayor to invest in infrastructure, such as prioritising either a new road or a new rail link or even public transport upgrades. The powers will also go into the education system, giving the mayor the opportunity to shape the local curriculum within our schools, an opportunity to adjust standards and allocate funding to meet regional priorities. Those new skills include skills and employment programme, something around apprenticeships, new powers stretching to health and social care, social services and welfare, green policies, public services, local government accountability, and devolved law and justice powers. So huge change coming forward. And this is absolutely not a case of if this is happening, it's a case of when it will happen. The list actually is not an exhaustive list. It does give us some idea of that kind of huge change that is coming down. And all of those powers currently sit within national government, but will be handed down to that much more local level. And what size of these new areas will we expect them to be? So we read in the white paper, it'll be for places in excess of 1.5 million residents. The paper also states that the whole of England will be governed under unitary authorities. There will be no more county councils. There will be no more district councils. And when you've read the paper fully, you'll also see that there will be no more small unitaries. The expected size of unitary authorities are expected to be around the 500,000 mark, although the paper does recognise that there will be some exceptions moving forward. So what does all of this mean for Torbay? Well, the government want to see an elected mayor as being the gold standard at a regional level, and I will talk more about this in a moment. And we will also be required to have a larger sized Torbay unitary, and whatever that may look like. Certainly a unitary of just over 145,000 residents is and will be considered too small, and that larger number being closer to 500,000 is being promoted. But this evening's cabinet paper doesn't provide direct answers to either of these questions, but it does provide a roadmap of how we will get there. We as a cabinet believe that our regional area, i.e. the area covered by a directly elected mayor, should be Devon and Cornwall, the far southwest peninsula. It is a large enough area to meet that minimum threshold, 1.5 million residents. It is coterminous with the police, Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, and it is a long recognised as a strategic area in the context of being both more rural and less economically developed than other parts of the country. If you look across the two counties, tourism, farming, agriculture, the emerging energy sector, together with food and drink, are important sectors for the two counties. The area is also a strategic location in terms of maritime trade and defence, with bases including Devonport in Plymouth. So both counties have previously been pursuing devolution deals via those previous devolution options. Therefore, it seems that each county appears to be a natural partner. And conversations regarding devolution have continued to take place across those upper tier authorities, including Devon, Cornwall, Plymouth and Torbay. However, thus far, no strategic agreement has been made, and as such, there is no council requirement for a decision on that this evening. However, from a cabinet perspective, we would wish to confirm our position that we believe, and this is where I quote 3.1 of the recommendation, that in the light of the policy position of the government for universal coverage of strategic authorities and a recognition that the most far-reaching and flexible powers will be given to mayoral strategic authorities, this cabinet confirms its support for a mayoral strategic authority comprising of Cornwall, Devon, Plymouth and Torbay, should agreement be reached by all authorities. I do want to move on to part 2 of this evening's report, and in a moment I will allow my seconder to spend much more time explaining the rationale behind this recommendation. However, and ultimately, government have confirmed unitaries will need to be a minimum of 500,000 residents. We are not proposing any lines on maps. We believe that this should be done in collaboration with both the upper tier authorities and district councils. But more importantly, or certainly as important, would be to have a single evidence base that would help us to work up an options appraisal. Certainly during the various webinars that I have attended, ministers have stated on more than one occasion that services must be relatable to place. In other words, our services must relate to our residents. And in any expanded unitary, my view to allow the best way of achieving this would be through that evidence base built together across those affected unitaries, counties and district councils. I believe that it is that evidence base that would cover items including travel to work routes, potential growth areas, housing, accommodation, access to healthcare, etc., to name but a few. Therefore, I will formally move at this point part 2, which is that Cabinet instructs the Chief Executive to prepare an evidence base and to develop an options appraisal for local government reorganisation for consideration by the Council in due course. So I apologise for the length of that to effectively put on the table the proposal, but it hopefully gives you some of the background, and we will talk obviously much more as we go through the debate in a moment. That is the proposal. I'll ask Councillor Lewis to second.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Very happy to second. And as you said in your words, I will go into a bit more detail on the local government reorganisation part of it, the LGR. And as you know, we listened into the webinar the other day where we had the Minister who was taking questions, and those questions, the answers came out of those, which I'll go through today, the ones that I think will be relevant for Torbay. Clearly, Plymouth, Devon and us and Cornwall have been having Cabinet and Council meetings to go through it, one of which was the decision to delay the elections, which has to be in by tomorrow. Clearly, we haven't got elections until 2027, so it doesn't, we don't have to put anything in for tomorrow, as opposed to Devon, who are doing so. They made it very clear that the government will be sending out a letter by the end of this month outlining exactly how LGR will take place and what they expect. What they have said that They need interim proposals by March, and all councils to try and work together. So in other words, for Plymouth, Torbay, Devon County and all the districts to work together to come up with one proposal, if we can. That is their goal, that they don't want to dictate to us. They want us to come up with a proposal going forward, and that has to be into the government by March. And then the final proposals, the next stage of it, will be by the autumn. So it's quite a speedy process. And as the chairman said, the size they're looking at is 500,000. At this stage, they haven't got an upper limit, but they would like 500,000. If it's not in the region of 5,000, to put the reasons why you believe it should be less than that. They realise that boundary changes is going to be a very complex issue, but they want it to sort of fit around the public services and strong connection with the community. So those boundary changes from whatever unitary, whether you have 1, 2, 3 unitaries. And the government expects all areas to put in proposals because they see the whole of the country having unitaries. Again, as the chairman said, county councils will be a thing of the past and so will districts. So we're at the heart of it, having already been a unitary, albeit too small going forward. They also see a key role for parish and town councils. Clearly, we've got one town council. With the proposals going through, there's a very strong possibility that we will have to look at town councils again for Torquay and Paignton. And again, they say it should be evidence-based. It's not a question of drawing a line on a map. It's showing that the new unitaries, whatever size, wherever they are, shouldn't just be drawing on a line. It should be looking at communities, how they fit in, how they connect. So those were the major questions that sort of came up. And there wasn't an option of, for instance, I don't think there is an option for Torbay to be a unitary on its own. And they don't want to leave unitaries out. So in other words, if you have a bigger unitary, they don't want that unitary to leave a smaller unitary outside of that base. That's really what came out of the webinar, and I think that the crucial thing is what the letter will say that comes out by the end of January, because the Minister kept on referencing it, so that letter will obviously and clearly have more details. In my remarks, I would also like to thank the Chairman, Councillor Dave Thomas, and our Chief Executive, Anne-Marie Bond. While we were all relaxing and having a good time over the Christmas period, they were working very hard for the good people of Torbay to come to try and find a solution going forward that we could all have agreement on. Clearly that was not the case, so there's a lot of work to do, as it says in the recommendation, of trying to come up with a mayoral system for the peninsula, for Cornwall, Devon, Plymouth and Torbay. And then when it comes to, I believe, and a few years ago, probably more than a few years ago now, Exeter put in for a unitary, and at that time Torbay also put in for a South Devon unitary because they asked us how we saw it. And at that time we did say that we felt ourselves that it would be better to have a greater South Devon, including Torbay and other parts of Devon. But it is important that going forward, and the recommendation that our officers work together, is that we work with all the people involved. So we work with the district, we work with the county council, we work with Plymouth to find a solution for the local government reorganisation. We may not want it, but we've got to have it. And if we are going to have it, I think Torbay is perfectly placed to lead on it. So I'm hoping that it will be a Torbay greater unitary rather than people consuming Torbay, because I think we have done well over the years. We've proved cross-party that we actually can stand on our own 2 feet. Our finances are in good order. Children's services have improved under the past administration. We're carrying that forward. We've got the ICO for adult services. We've got over £100 million for regeneration. Torbay is in a really good place, and if people want to come and join us, I'm sure they'll be most welcome. So I think it's good for Torbay. We've just got to make sure that we can take our partners with us. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. So at this point, I'm opening up to debate, and I'm actually going to be going to non-cabinet members first this evening to give everybody in the room who has turned out this evening to be able to say something and have a say in this before coming back to the cabinet. So move outside of the room. Thank you. Councillor Long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It seems odd to be staying seated, but I'll do that. As a Liberal, I would normally welcome devolution and decisions being transferred down from the government towards the lowest possible level. However, it has to be done right, and it has to be done in Torbay's best interests. And I have to say that one area where we will agree on is that it has been madness that the white paper was published by the Labour government in December, just before Christmas, and a decision being expected to be made the first proper week back after Christmas. This type of decision should not be rushed just because the Labour government don't want their legislative timetable tied up with local government issues. The priority should be what is right for Torbay. And Torbay should not just simply agree with what Devon wants just because the Conservatives want to delay their elections because they're scared of the voters. The community must have their opportunity to have their say. Residents have already given us their steer. In 2016, you'd be given to think that there was only one referendum that happened in which the will of the people had to be adhered to. There were other elections. Councillor Pentney was elected to this council in 2016, but also there was a referendum on the mayoral system in which the residents voted by a greater margin than the Brexit referendum against having a mayor. And that should be our starting point, and we must also respect the will of Torbay residents in that. On devolution, the Lib Dem group is not convinced that Devon and Cornwall with Plymouth, etc., combined authority is necessarily the best approach. There could also be, for example, a more strategic combined authority involving Somerset, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council and others might be more appropriate given their powers over transport, etc. I understand from a conversation myself with the leader of Somerset Council that Devon and Torbay might be able to join their proposed combined authority a bit later down the line, and I also understand from conversations that others have had with the leader of BCP that they might also be open to that wider strategic combined authority, and this should be explored with them. On local government reorganisation, again, we need to do what is right for Torbay and to stand up for Torbay. Other parts of Devon, as Councillor Law will testify on meetings that we've been involved in, other parts of Devon will be more than happy to draw lines on maps and make decisions about Torbay, but we can't allow that to happen. Other smaller unitaries, such as the Isles of Scilly, are also facing this, where a larger neighbouring council are speaking for them. There are also implications of local government reorganisation for our children's. The improvements that we've been made to those services by Torbay could be put at risk by local government reorganisation. My understanding is, on meetings I've been involved with, that contrary to what's been said this evening, and from conversations I've had with councillor colleagues in Exeter, that the government is showing now more flexibility over population thresholds, with the figure of 300,000 being mentioned. There is also the phrase the government has been using about smaller unitaries and meeting local needs. And I think that there could be a very good argument for Torbay actually, and using the examples of children's services, of Torbay meeting local needs much better than neighbouring larger unitary, other neighbouring councils. Improvements to children's services happened under Torbay as it is. I fear that the Conservatives' approach has always been to try and foist off services such as children's to other councils, and that has not worked. Bigger does not mean better, as residents in the 1990s pointed out when we divested ourselves from Devon. As councillors, we need to believe in Torbay and our ability to best serve residents as we are, or maybe slightly bigger, if that is in our best interests. The white paper mentions that exceptions can be made, and Torbay is worthy of being an exception, and we need to believe in ourselves and argue for Torbay's case rather than just giving up. I have to say that, and I've said this previously, that I've been very concerned about the approach that has been taken to both devolution and LGR by the administration. Myself and Councillor Law have learnt more about what is happening Devon-wide from other councils in Devon than we have from our own council, and we are an overall control council. I was also invited to the ministerial webinar, which I went to, but the invite was given to me by the Local Government Association rather than this council, which is just bizarre. If there is to be a united Torbay voice, then this kind of secrecy should be ditched, and there needs to be more working together. This could have been an opportunity to work together, but that's not happened, sadly. I'm also slightly concerned that this administration has been happy to roll over and just let the government do what they will with Torbay. Torbay has voted against having an elected mayor, and we should be arguing that case with government. If the government then chooses to do that, then that's their approach, but we should still be believing in ourselves and arguing for our residents. This evening should have been an opportunity for full council to express their view. I know there are constitutional reasons why that's not the case, but I believe that all councillors should have been given that opportunity to express Torbay's views as a full council rather than as a cabinet meeting, which would have been far more democratic. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I move on, I am going to respond, because I don't want all of the, this is a cabinet meeting, so it's not a council meeting, so I intend that we should try to respond some of the points as they come up. Don't want them to get lost in the ether and we get towards the end of the meeting and someone says, well, you didn't pick up my particular point. So if I can address some of the points that you've raised. I really thought that we're in a good place to start with, both agreeing on that this is a madness idea. And it really is. It really is. Because the thing is, our residents have no idea whatsoever what is coming down the line. And why should they? 16th of December, they're gearing up for Christmas and they're ready to enjoy all of that time with their families. And then they go into the new year. And it's the first day back, Monday the 6th of January. And actually, they're just about opening up the diary and finding out what's on, and the kids going back to school, etc. And then the first thing that they'll hear is in one of our local newspapers, Devon have, and all of the districts are making these decisions. Well, actually, it is. I agree with you. It is absolute madness that we should be put in this position from national government, because where do our residents fit in to any of this? Absolutely agree. And then we move on to the mayor situation. And I think, for me, the only similarity between the mayor of a regional strategic authority and the mayor of a local authority, as in Torbay, a local unitary, is the spelling of the word mayor, M-A-Y-O-R. And that is where the similarity ends. I've tried to give you, in my opening, some of the kind of powers that are going to be handed down to the new directly elected mayor for whatever the area is. And they're very different. I never saw any of our elected mayors being able to have control over transport infrastructure or shaping the school curriculum or bringing back the RDA. So these are very, very different. You then spoke about, is Devon and Cornwall the right answer, or should it be something like Somerset, Bournemouth and Christchurch. Actually, Wiltshire is normally put into that mix when that's been raised to me before. There should be a Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire. And we have to remember that in the webinars that I've spoke about, one of the things from government that does come out is that services must be relatable to place. What hasn't happened yet is nobody's explained to me how the services in Wiltshire relate to the residents in Truro. And I'm having a bit of a difficulty getting my head around that. Decisions made in Swindon affecting residents in Truro. I think that is a stretch too far, personally. But it is about relatable services for place. I think we would agree that you spoke about some unitaries too large and just moving straight into them. Well, I don't think you were thinking of Somerset at the time, but Somerset certainly springs to my mind, and we know the difficulties that they're having with effectively their finances there. But what I would sum up with say is Torbay is absolutely not rolling over and playing dead. Torbay recognises the difficulties. Torbay is actually front and centre, working with those who want to work with us. And I can honestly say to you that I haven't had Somerset, Wiltshire or Dorset leaders on the phone, and neither have Devon and neither have Plymouth. But the other four that I've spoken about, Cornwall, Devon, Plymouth and Torbay, certainly have had meetings. And I've had meetings, of course, with district leaders as well, that actually abound Torbay. Why would I not? Why would I not? That, for me, is actually not rolling over. And I think with the way that this is presented, we can do one of two things. The government have told us the direction of travel. They've told us exactly what's going to happen, that there are going to be directly elected mayors across the whole of England. They've also told us that local government reorganisation is coming down the line. Now, here in Torbay, we have a choice. One, we can either say, okay, this is the direction of travel, and we may not like it, but we're going to be part of it because that is the sensible thing to do. Or I can sit in the corner and say, I don't want to play ball, I don't want to talk to anybody, I am rolling up my toys and sitting in the corner, and I'll let it all wash over me. What we know will happen is we will be done too once everybody else has put forward what they want, and then it'll be a case of, you're left with X, Y, Z. There's lessons to be learned from not too long ago with our LEP. But it's not about looking back. It's about, we know where we are. We know that we've got two choices. For me, Dawn, I absolutely don't agree with everything that's there. And I do agree that I think the way it's being rolled out is absolutely crazy. But I'm the leader at the moment, and therefore we have to embrace these things and swim with the tide. Okay, thank you. Councillor Law.
Thank you. So I'm going to start by saying that I do fully appreciate that the decisions before you today are something that's been forced on us by central government, and it's an appallingly short window for the expressions of interest in being in that first tranche. However, the thing that keeps coming up in my mind is that old saying, which is decide in haste, repent at leisure, and that's what concerns me. So, and I say, why do I say that? Because these are not new. We've known that devolution has been coming. Actually, this devolution was started off under the last Conservative government, and various options were explored over that length of time previously. and many months in Torbay, which then culminated in us all in a unanimous agreement at full council to pursue a Devon and Torbay combined authority with no mayor. And now, after the Christmas break, obviously, I've come back and it's all changed, and we're now aspiring to pursue a Devon, Cornwall, Plymouth and Torbay deal with a mayor, which is very, very different thing to what we reached unanimous agreement on before. Though I'm also, and I mentioned this afternoon in a meeting with Anne-Marie, I'm not sure who the Isles of Scilly will be joining with in this scenario, because I've heard from the Isles of Scilly today that they have not been in discussions with Devon and Torbay. They've been dictated to by Cornwall and don't feel part of these decisions. They haven't had any discussions with the wider area. So perhaps, like I say, this adds to my feelings that these are decisions being made in haste. So it's the Labour government's white paper, like you said, came out before Christmas. I'm going to try and skip over and not repeat things that my colleague here has said. Councillor Long, not that I'd forgotten your name there for a minute, but this is about being considered in the first wave. You know, this isn't the be-all and end-all. There will be further tranches of devolution coming up. So what we're concerned about is that we're being pushed into this. We're being pushed into rushing headlong into what appears almost now to have become a deal by default with Devon, Cornwall, Plymouth, if Cornwall and Plymouth change their mind, because they've pulled out at the last minute. Isles of Scilly feel totally ignored by this. So I'm really struggling to see, I've read all the papers and I'm still struggling to see how this is in the best interest or benefits of Torbay and her residents. That's a devolution. In terms of local government reorganisation, I was a little bit confused by what Councillor Lewis said, because he started off by saying, we're too small, we're going to go, and then started saying that we're not. So in terms of local government, I'm pleased that we are agreed that any reorganisation of boundaries and the governance structure needs to be data-led. And ideally, as I believe one of you did say, it would be data-led and informed and endorsed by our communities, the voters, whose lives are going to be impacted by this. However, again, like with devolution, it appears that this government is determined to rush ahead, force decisions on local authority, again, in haste. And I worry again that we will be repenting at leisure. The white paper sets out plans to reorganise local government with an aim to establish larger unitary authorities, as you said, in the two-tier areas. But the caveat to that within the white paper, as I have read it, is that is only where smaller unitary authorities cannot meet local need. And I think Torbay can. I think we are doing a brilliant job, all of us together in making that, meeting that local need. I've heard a lot of rumblings locally in meetings we've been on with, like yourselves, with other authorities, about Devon being split into two unitary authorities, one being based around Plymouth, the other being based around Devon. And what struck me in these meetings is that we've attended is actually how Torbay seems to get overlooked in these decisions of how others wish to carve up the map of Devon. And we need to be shouting loudly. We believe that Torbay has a really strong, good story of success to tell. And we are all part of that success story, every single one of us. And we are, especially compared to some of our neighbouring authorities, such as Devon County Council and Plymouth. I'm nearly got to the end of what I want to say, but I will say that both Plymouth and Devon have massive issues around the delivery of their children's social care. And we have pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we are doing well in that area. In their home to school transport, by the second quarter of this year, Devon was already £30 million overspent on their budget. So that's another thing that we do much better than Devon, and we need to be shouting our story about. Whilst Torbay has highways issues, these absolutely pale into significance in terms of Devon's, and I know that will be part of the devolution deal and the mayoral's responsibilities if and ever comes, but I'm talking about the everyday bits like the potholes, which will be left to us to be dealing with. In the first 88 months of last year, Devon County Council had 966 complaints and claims made against them for damages caused by potholes. Those claims totaled £1.1 million. So whilst we are smaller than the number of residents that the government aspires to. Torbay is perfectly formed. We are more than holding our own when it comes to comparing ourselves to our neighbouring authorities in so many ways, not just the examples I give. So please, please, let us all work together. Let's fight for Torbay. Let's fight for the staff that work at Torbay Council, for all the people whose livelihoods and futures are at threat if we just end up subsumed once again by Devon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that Councillor Lewis wants to say a few words, and then I'll come back to myself. Chris.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Law, you misunderstood. I didn't say, and your last comment about Torbay being consumed, I think Torbay should lead from the front. You've given prime examples where we've done such a good job. Wouldn't it be great if Torbay can teach the rest of Devon how they should be doing it? And the government, I mean, you've only got to read the white paper to see what they want. There will be exceptions, but I don't think there will be exceptions for places like Torbay. Therefore, if we are going to play the game, we need to play the game. And that's why Councillor Thomas and others have been talking to the regions, the districts, and the County Council and Plymouth to try and find a solution where we can all go forward. But if everywhere in the country turned around and said we're not playing the game, the Labour Party made it very clear that they will dictate. And that's what we don't want in Torbay. I think we have, and you've explained it extremely well, that how well we're doing, we want to lead from the front. And, you know, there are other areas where we desperately need to work with our neighbours. Housing. 940 homes a year. We're only, you know, historically 250, 300. We need to work with places like Teignbridge, South Hams and others to be able to achieve those targets. Otherwise, the whole of Torbay will be built on. And that's what we can't allow to happen. With transport, how closely we work with our neighbours. How did we get the Devon Link Road? By working with our neighbours. So we do work with our neighbours. On children's services and adults, we have a great record. And wouldn't it be great if we could bring our neighbours in to be part of Torbay Unitary and teach them how they should be doing the job? That's what we've got to do. We haven't got to be scared that we have to draw up the drawbridge and say Torbay wants to be on its own. Let's bring in the others, teach them how they should be doing it. We've got excellent officers, as we all know. The government have stated in the white paper what they want to happen. We either play the game and always looking at the greater good of Torbay, but play the game and achieve what we want to do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think nobody does not want to fight for Torbay. We absolutely do want to fight for Torbay. We will fight for Torbay. But let me just clarify a few things, and they're in our decision. So one of the things that's been spoken about are requests for elections to be pushed back. So we don't have any elections within Torbay, so that's not an issue for Torbay. The other one is we will not be in the first wave of devolution because we don't have an agreement amongst all of the areas that we think would be the way forward. Section 1 of tonight's decision recommendation talks about our wish to work in that area, but there's no way we can't declare that to government because we don't have a deal where everybody is signed up and ready to go. So the combined county authority, we do know that the statutory instrument has been laid. We do know that that is expected to be complete by February, and we do know that that will be up and running. We expect it to be up and running by March, as long as nothing untoward happens. And the other thing that we do know, and this is where we absolutely get caught up in all of this immediately, is we know because we don't have 500,000, we know that we're going to be getting a letter in January, basically government asking for our preliminary proposals to get to a number closer to 500,000, and we have to submit those by March. And the second part of our decision tonight is saying, actually, if that's what we've got to do, if that is the track that's coming down the road, let us get in place an evidence base. We talk about an options appraisal. An options appraisal, you would expect more than one option in there. You wouldn't expect a single option that says, oh, whatever, yeah? But, so what we are trying to do is say, we need that evidence base to be, because the thing is, whatever we put to government, they will want a piece of evidence. And my view is, it would be much better to do the evidence and let the evidence lead us to where the lines on the map are, rather than arbitrarily put lines on a map and try and find some evidence to fit it. So I think just to try and answer what the points that you've raised directly, thank you. Sorry, let's go to the back if I may. Councillor Cowell.
Thank you, Chair. And like everyone else, I think the speed at which this is being processed by central government is regrettable. And I do worry about what potential outcomes there are, not just for Torbay and Devon and our regional partners, but councils across the country. It's a radical reform of local government, probably long overdue, but for it to be done at such haste with a lack of time for proper representation and consultation is a potential recipe for disaster. As for, and I think part of the challenge as well within the white paper, because like you, Councillor Thomas, I decided to use one of my days off reading the white paper. And again, it is frustrating that you have two levels of reorganisation. You have what I perceive to be the really positive opportunity of devolution of powers out of Westminster down to the regions. What that region looks like, whether it's Devon and Cornwall, whether it's Devon and Cornwall and Somerset and BCP or whatever, remains to be seen. And the fact that we're not in the first wave means that we do have time to explore those further options, and particularly to unpick the understandable reluctance of Cornwall at this stage, because I think Cornwall is a unique county. It always has been. The River Tamar was put there for a purpose. So I think the opportunity for us to explore how the benefits of a combined authority will advance some of those areas such as transport, and most importantly, I would say, the delivery of housing in the southwest, far southwest. Because those powers that we struggle with locally and the numbers that you refer to within the 940 could actually be made a little bit easier on a sub-regional basis. We don't want Torbay being built on all of our green fields. We are constrained with being a coastal resort with that big blue thing called the Bay, limiting our options for housing development. And we also need to ensure that we have the opportunity of strong economic growth on a regional level. And I was one of the people who led the campaign against the elected mayor in Torbay. But this is completely different. And I look at the model that Andy Burnham in Manchester and what he is delivering around adults and children's and public transport. You know, he has now taken buses back under control of the local authority. That is to be applauded and to be welcomed. It stops the monopolies of some of the national companies who run the profitable routes. So there are real opportunities for a regional mayor to be able to have those powers. And I think that is something that is it's a significant difference from the mayor that used to run Torbay and its limited services compared to the strategic delivery. And then, of course, there's the issue that we have around local government reorganisation. And I remember those days when we were part of Devon, and I never understood how a councillor in Bideford can make a decision about issues in Brixham, or indeed vice versa. And that's always been the case. And the other thing is Torbay was a net contributor in terms of its preset into Devon. And it was people from outside of Torbay deciding where our money was being spent. When we became a unitary, and despite all the political differences and the challenges and the rocky roads that we've had since those days, including the spell of having elected mayors, and with due respect to a past elected mayor sat in the cabinet, we've always managed to pull through. We have those political differences, we have those spats, but I think the fact that we are evidenced the most improved council award recently, we have children's services under control, we have adult social care and the ICO under control. I think the NHS would run a mile from expanding that principle into a Devon-wide unitary authority. So I think that there are some real issues in terms of local government reform. Like everyone else, I want to see us have the principle as part of the options review to look at the arguments, and I think they're compelling arguments, including Torbay Harbour Authority, which it helps administer the most profitable, the most expensive landed catch by value in England, i.e. Brixham. That is a significant argument about how we manage our harbours and ports. But I also think that the options will obviously have to look at how a greater Torbay, or whatever it may be, looks like and what it does. It could actually be that we look at the model of the boundaries of the South Devon Healthcare Primary Trust. That may actually be, something that there is synergy, but it has to be place related, and that is the key thing. The CCA isn't so much emphasis on the place relationship, but the local government reform is. I think the figure of 500,000 is a civil service figure plucked out the air just to divide up the country in some kind of equal basis. We can demonstrate the argument for Torbay. We can actually talk to our neighbouring authorities to say, look, if it's right for us to, and we need to have the conversations with them, how can we expand our positives and take on board their positives? Because I don't think we should be lecturing to neighbouring authorities, look at us how good we are, because we're not perfect. No local authority is perfect. That's the nature of local government. And I suppose when we look at how Torbay will be run in the future under an enlarged unitary, if that is the outcome, I find it quite ironic that Councillor Lewis refers to the possibility of needing to introduce town councils when he spent so much of his efforts in 2019 opposing the possible introduction of town councils in Paignton and Torquay. Not just Councillor Lewis, but many of his colleagues, Councillor David Thomas, and indeed the former MP. So I think, in summary, the real worry for me also is that this is a massive distraction. It's a distraction from the delivery of adult social care services reform that we should be talking about on a national basis. It's a distraction from those priorities of delivering homes and economic regeneration. It's going to be a huge drain on resources for our officers. And it's been referred to, I think, by Councillor Law, the uncertainty for all of our local government workers across the country, but for us, more importantly, in Torbay. If you were a social worker in children's services, where we have invested so much effort and energy in our staff, and Devon is a failing authority when it comes to children's services, what would you be thinking every time you went home after your day's work? So I think we do have to work really hard collectively. We have to have a bit of an open mind, not pull up the shutters. I don't think anybody's suggesting that. In fact, that would be totally the wrong thing to do. We need to have those open and honest and build relationships with our genuine relationships with our near neighbours, because they have been strained historically. I mean, I remember Councillor Pennington from Malden saying it'd be over his dead body that Torbay would ever consume Malden within its boundaries. And we still have many of those kind of attitudes from our neighbours. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done. And I, for one, along with the independent colleagues, and I know across the chamber, will strain every sinew to get the right solution for Torbay when it comes to local government reform. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Who would have thought we would be giving Councillor Trevor Pennington a mention this evening?
Shows how far back I go.
Councillor Fox, first of all, my apologies, sir. I was due to call you and I was looking at you. Then all I could remember was Mike, and I thought I can't just call you Mike. So
call me Mike. It's all right.
I couldn't remember your surname. So please forgive me, Councillor Fox.
Well, as an officer, I do go back to Councillor Trevor Pennington's time and the disagreements we had over the ring road round Paynton. So I have many happy hours of debating with Trevor Pennington. Just thank you for your presentations on both of you on the table. And I agree with what's been said by everybody about the appalling lack of time on this. One wonders what the real agenda is. But there are greater opportunities, and I think we have to take them. You said, Councillor Thomas, about swimming with the tide. Can I make a plea that we, don't take this the wrong way, that we swim together, so that as 18 plus 18, 36 councillors, we keep each other informed. And I think with that openness, a lot of the difficulties will be ironed out. So I make a plea for that. Just a couple of other things have been mentioned. The Greater Torbay idea, getting below 500,000. I went on to Google yesterday, and I think it's 136,000. Sorry, 364,000 is the figure for Southham's, Teambridge, and Torbay. We're actually running neck and neck with Teambridge, which I hadn't realised. They're obviously caught up a lot with their new housing schemes. From a planning point of view, I would speak as a planner, wouldn't I? But there's a desperate need for regional planning to go beyond the boundaries of Torbay for some of the reasons that Chris Lewis has said and others have said. I think that's really important, and for health provision as well. We have a natural area for travel to work for health provision, and I think it's important that we do the collaboration. The LGA came out with a response a couple of days ago, which you may have seen, to the National Planning Policy Framework. And the key word in that to me is collaboration, a collaborative approach. And so I think it's important that we see our near neighbours as natural allies, that we work with them, that we listen to them. And I think there's a lot we can do to get a jointly worked up programme and an agenda. And I think that 350, 360,000, I would say that's a reasonable sort of ballpark figure, rather than going for slavishly going to the 500,000. So I just plead for more cooperation between all of us. I think we all want the same things. One of the things I used to say as an inspector when I started inquiries was we all have one thing in common in this room. We all want the best for our district. And I think that's absolutely true around the table tonight. And so I just leave that thought with you, but thank you for listening to me out.
No, thank you indeed, Councillor. And, we have said, actually, there's much more that unites us in this particular debate, i.e. Torbay is the thing that unites us than any political differences that we may have. But just when this devolution paper came out on the 16th of December, I recognised that it was really important to take all of the leaders on the journey. It was no point at all just putting something in now and then just being a surprise for everybody. So over those approximately 18 days from when it came out, and that includes Christmas and all the bank holidays. We have met on no less than 4 occasions, the group leaders, to actually go step by step. So as something has developed, as something's coming down the line, we've had that conversation, because this is, you know, as I said, one of the biggest changes in local government for more than half a century, and it's important that everyone plays their part. We've all got a part to play for certain, and we all need to step up and play that part. But I do absolutely concur with that. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brooks. Brooke, apologies, no S.
I don't know. Thank you, Chair. My colleagues will know that I have a lot of reticence when I first read the whole paper. I read the 118 pages. Extremely, in my opinion, very verbose and not too specific, which then gives us an almighty problem to, as people say, rush and you repent at a leisure virtually. You know, first point I just want to ask, Chair, the costs involved in this, looking at the reorganisation, it's not just financial, but as Councillor Cowell alluded to, it's going to be a huge amount of time of our officers who are already stretched because we're trying to deliver lots for Torbay right now. My fear is that A, is a cost to the council, B, there's a cost and lost time and a cost and lost delivery of what we need to do right now, and this could take a year, 2 years to actually iron out properly. So it's just putting that in the melting pot. What can we get from the government in a way of financial help as we walk through this, extra people, so that they can be focused on that, and our officers who are doing a grand job in other areas can focus on our place and our delivery of what we want to do. So that was just as a question.
Shall we try and get an answer for that first?
Yep.
And then if you've got a second point, we'll move on to that.
Yeah, the other one was...
Sorry, let's try and deal with that point first. Thank you.
Of course. So under the proposals at the current time, there are no proposals from the government to offer any funding to help deal with the capacity challenges. As the report sets out, and I think as the debate has also said, this will be significantly time-consuming to prepare the evidence base and then support the preparation of an options appraisal for members' consideration, and that opportunity cost also in that respect. So unfortunately, no indication of financial support for councils in terms of undertaking local government reorganisation at this time.
Because within that, you know, fighting the corner, as we say, for Torbay, that we are doing a great job in certain areas and we need help though in other areas. If we don't get that kind of financial help, it will damage Torbay in this actual process of trying to go forward. And if it's like 2 years, I mean, I read the paper, there was an article, Price Waterhouse was doing an estimation of I think it was 2.9 billion in savings, but there's loads of other analysis done on other places that have become big unitaries where actually they haven't had this financial savings and they're in trouble. So there's weakness on evidence of savings of cash. So I'm just fearful of this 2-year process that actually ultimately damages Torbay whilst we're trying to deliver something which maybe most of us don't even want. So I think that needs to go into the options appraisal. You know, that's a negative side of it. The other thing though was I ran for mayor twice. I'm rather passionate for the areas we all are. But we can get very insular at times. You know, we're focused on our residents and we get cocooned at times and we don't necessarily look beyond and therefore it's can't think of the right word. It's down to us to be that open-minded, to actually look at something that we might never have thought of or never wanted because of the actual extra benefits. So I'm really relieved that we're doing this options appraisal, and I look forward to the material given by our officers so we can discuss it. But I just wanted the final point was I listened to the leader of Labour in Exeter, whose line was, well, Exeter should be its own unitary authority. The decisions for Exeter should be down to Exeter, but they haven't got that. I think they're 240,000, something like that. So, sorry? Oh, but they want to try and do a little bit of a, what's it called, a donut? Acquire a few more to get to about a quarter of a million, but they're never going to get anywhere near the 500,000. So is there wriggle room for, we don't need to, because I'm worried we're doing like mergers and acquisitions, but we're being forced to merge with like businesses we wouldn't merge with, could weaken us. We certainly don't want to acquire places that we wouldn't want to acquire, that ends up weakening Torbay. So I think there's that numbers thing in the appraisal, the options of, you know, can we get to just a 300, 350 more? Councillor Law, I think, mentioned there's maybe been conversations with government, it's not quite up to the 500,000 up for negotiation. So bringing that into all the equation.
Thank you, Councillor. To try and address some of the points, it's not a 2-year process. I only wish it was a 2-year process. We'd have an opportunity to take our residents on the journey. They'd be able to understand. It's not a 2-year process. We are expecting that we will have to put our draft proposals in by March 2025, and we will be expected to put our final submission in by September 2025. That is just months away.
I didn't mean that was 2 years. I meant that's a shorter period. But then it's going to take another, after you've agreed it, so then it'd be a whole year or a year and 2 years for, you know, the apparatus to even get going.
They're expected to be set up by 2027, yes. Okay, thank you very much. Any further debate from, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Darling.
Thank you. I think there's been a lot of agreement and kind of common ground going forward with this, but my only real concern is we all agree that the timeline's too short, but why has it kind of been added to by this cabinet meeting being called today? The 10th of January deadline was required if upper tier authorities wanting to postpone elections, and that doesn't count for us. So my one disappointment is that our starting mark is going to be a cabinet position, when if we'd maybe taken a bit more time, hopefully we could have got a whole council position. And the position we're taking now, I agree a Greater Torbay or South Devon is the way going forward, but the Devon County Council leader this morning expressed his clear intention that he wanted a Devon-wide. So the position that the cabinet is taking is almost putting us at loggerheads right at the start. So I'd be interested to see how we negotiate that.
So I think one of the ways of negotiating that is through an evidence base. So what I am saying, which is probably very different to what James is saying, is I wish to be led by the evidence. I said at the beginning, you can either put arbitrarily some lines on some maps and try to come up with some evidence that fits it, or you can pull something together by the evidence base. I would go back, and I keep going back to that that quote that was on the webinar, which is basically that services must be relatable to place. And for me, that is, as soon as I heard it on the webinar, for me, that was the thing. I wrote it down, and the reason I keep going back to it is because I don't want to misquote it. I think it's really important that it says services must be relatable to place. And so what Devon's decision today was effectively, and it was a council decision because there's a request to push back their elections. That's not a cabinet decision, that's a council decision. Our cabinet decision this evening will hopefully be to ask our officers, instruct our officers to start that piece of work for an evidence base. Clearly that evidence base can't be done on its own. That needs to be done with the unitaries and the districts around us. Of course it does. And the final decision that went through Devon County Council today was that basically what they call Team Devon, which is basically all of the districts plus the council, will have that conversation with the two unitaries about what Devon will look like moving forward. Because Devon, the way I look at it, it's a triangular jigsaw with Devon, Plymouth and Torbay. Whichever piece of that jigsaw you move, you can't move one piece without affecting the other two, plus all of the districts that are in between. So if we are able to, pull together an evidence base, I have spoken to Devon about this evidence base. They are on board with doing that. The districts between us are also on board with pulling together an evidence base. So that's a great start if everyone then has the same piece of evidence that we're all working towards. Gives us a really good way to try and move forward. I hope that gives you some assurance. Thank you. Any further questions or debate from outside of the Cabinet? In which case then, before we move to the vote, we will move to the Cabinet. Councillor Tyman.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've been around long enough. I'm not talking as a councillor, but thank you. Okay, around long enough to have seen many ideas come forward, and very often they don't end up where you set out. I think that there's a long way to go on this debate and the suggestions here yet. I think a lot could change. I think that we need to be alert to that. We may find we waste some time exploring some options that no longer are viable. That might seem an unfortunate thing to have to do, but it may be that we're taken down this route. I see we've been set on this route by a government that actually, not only on this subject, but on a number of others, I think is acting with wonderful ambition that it's going to change the world, but actually some fairly poor insight as to what its actions are going to have a consequence on. And I think that that's the general view of business, that's the general view of the markets at the moment, and I think that what it's introduced here, particularly putting these two separate items together, is really creating a lot of confusion. I think I'm absolutely with what's been said from opposite in terms of it's going to be a distraction. And I wish we weren't where we are. If I then come on to the local government reorganisation part of it, because I think you have to look at the two things largely separately. My view is that Torbay is working pretty well as it is. If it were to be an option to remain as we are, or broadly as we are, because I would have no worries about taking, for example, Malden into Torbay. If Malden wanted to come into Torbay, it feels to me in terms of a place that actually it belongs more in Torbay. And you may be able to take some other bits in. That the opportunities are there to look at a lot of different options. I certainly personally do not feel at all comfortable with the idea of going back to a total unitary Devon. I think that would be wrong. That's a personal view. I cannot see, in the same way as, was explained in terms of what caused Torbay to become a unitary in the first place, I cannot see things have changed. How are people here going to feel an empathy with people in Barnstable and places like that? I just don't think that works. I mean, there are a lot of options, and I think if we put the evidence base together, and if one of those options being looked at is that Torbay would be better off in the future, remaining largely as it is, we've then got something to argue with. So I don't want to rule out, in my mind, anything at this stage in terms of where this might end up. But what I really do feel is, unless we do a proper options appraisal, look at the advantages of alternatives, we would get nowhere arguing that Torbay should stay as it is. When we get the options appraisal done, we might decide actually Torbay staying as it is the right thing. We might decide it's the wrong thing. And I think it would be wrong of any of us to try and jump to a conclusion at this stage. So that's where I largely come on that subject. On the mayoral system, I personally do think that there is some logic to a Devon and Cornwall, and I know that Cornwall at the moment are feeling that's not the way they want to go. I actually have some understanding of how the Cornish think about that. I'm quarter Cornish myself. Perhaps I should be declaring that. I have great-grandparents who were born in Liskeard and Looe, respectively. So that's that. But my grandfather moved to London back in 1880, so the family's not actually lived in Cornwall since then, so a long time back. But so I understand a lot about the Cornish because I've got relations still there, and the way they actually do want to have independence. And that, I think, is driving a lot of their thoughts. They still have got this in their mind, that they would like to be an independent country, a lot of them.
I think we might need to move you on, Councillor.
Right. But let's come back to the mayoral thing. I think that having a mayoral system looks like it's going to be the only option that this government, as they are directing themselves at the moment, is going to give a solution. And I think that we have to get over the fact that we didn't like having an elected mayor in Torbay and recognise that this is a very different sort of elected mayor with very different powers. It was even mentioned early on what the powers would be. I suspect that's one of these things that it won't end up being quite like it's been stated at the moment by our leader and is in the white paper. Something will change amongst that lot, I'm sure. Some things might get better, some things might actually drop out that we wish hadn't. I still don't understand what's quite motivating government in doing this. Do they want a mayoral system so that they can actually devolve responsibility and actually retain an awful lot of influence? That could be what some of the thinking going on is. Influence through being able to influence the mayors to actually do things. There is an awful lot to go, but it looks to me, unless the government change direction, which is possible but doesn't look likely, that a mayoral system is going to be the one that's going to be best for us in whatever local government configuration we end up with. If that's the case, we need to talk, we need to keep our minds open. We may think at the moment, and as a put forward, I think that Devon and Cornwall in my mind makes sense, but it isn't the only option. And I think we need to be alert that if that's not looking as if it's going to be beneficial, then we need to explore other options. it's not impossible that we might just end up with what we've got coming on the immediate horizon, a Devon-Torbay combination. I think it's, again, I would say probably not the most likely place we're going to end up, but it's not an impossible place to end up. So I absolutely agree we need to keep our options open. I think that it could move in a direction where we're talking to other authorities that we're not talking to today. But so much is going to change, I think, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, to 3 months, to whatever. We're just going to be jumping one way or another. At the moment, all we're doing, we're not taking any decisions, we're not making any commitments in terms of where we're going to end up today, and I think it would be wrong to do so. I'm pleased we're not doing so. We are expressing what we think is our first choice, if it were able to be made, to happen. It's not the only choice on the mayoral side. So that's my taking it. I shall be supporting this direction that we're going to go and the motion that's being put in front of us, but I am doing it with an open mind. And I'll say one final thing. Yes, it's going to be a distraction. It's going to take our officers away. Cabinet is very aware of that, is already talking in terms of whether it can make extra budget allocations or whatever to help support this process. We're going to need to put it, and all I can say is thank goodness that we're in a strong financial position at the moment. We are actually better able to put more resource into making sure that this does not have a big detrimental impact upon other things in the council than would many other authorities. And, you know, I think if we'd been trying to do this piece of work 8 years ago, it would have really had a serious impact. I hope we can see this through so that it doesn't distract us. Of course, it's going to distract us, but it doesn't destroy what we need to do to support our community. We need to make sure that our community do not suffer by this distraction. Sorry, I've spoken for a long time. I've said enough.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. Move on to Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, personally, I feel extremely disappointed with this policy decision made by our government. This, indeed, is not the government's finest hour. We find ourselves having to make snap decisions about our future in such a short amount of time. This has not given us the opportunity to go to our communities and conduct a consultation in order to have our residents' opinions and their wishes. We are obviously here to make the right decisions, but quite frankly, I am very disappointed by the government's actions, giving us no choice but to implement these changes, or we fear by sitting on the fence, we may be left behind. And that is something we don't want for Torbay or the interests of our residents. There is a lot more talking and negotiating to be done on this policy. But we are a great success here in Torbay, of which we are all proud. We have strong voices leading us here in Torbay who have been working endlessly for our benefit, and we need to trust them to do the right thing and lead us forward. So I will support the motion this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. Dealing with the first part of the recommendation in relation to mayoral strategic authorities, it's unfortunate really, isn't it, this word mayor? It means so many different things in so many different contexts. We have a mayor in Torbay. It's our fantastic ceremonial mayor who presides over most of our full council meetings. That's what it currently means to us as councillors, and that's what it currently means to our residents. If we went back a couple of years, it would mean the elected mayor. In the context of this paper, it means effectively a super MP covering a much wider geography. As Chairman, as you said earlier, the only commonality in that is the word mayor. They've got totally different functions, and I think it's important that our residents don't get in any way misdirected into anticipating this is an arrangement for administration that we had in Torbay several years ago. What we've got here in this paper is a sensible response to something that's come outside, that's been created by government, and it's a situation that we've now got to progress in the most sensible way. And I think clearly, if there is going to be effectively a super MP, in the same way we have a police and crime commissioner covering Devon and Cornwall, it makes sense. That sort of area seems to work well for that. If we were going to have a mayoral strategic authority area, I could see how that could be, as a starting point, a sensible, logical arrangement. As I say, it seems to work well from a police and crime commissioner's perspective. And I don't think anyone that's seen, say, Andy Burnham, as Councillor Cowell identified, or some of the other sort of mayors that we've had in London, whether it's Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson or Sadiq Khan, I don't think any of them, when they were achieving things for their communities, thought, well, actually, we should go back to a council arrangement. Those mayors were only able to achieve things for their communities because government assisted them with extra funding. That's why Councillor Cowell and Mandy Burnham's been able to do things with buses that we'd love to do in Torbay, but that extra funding's not there. And so if this new arrangement that's being pushed down onto us comes with extra cash, and if this is the way to access that cash, then clearly that's a sensible thing for us to be exploring for our communities. In relation to the evidence-led approach to local government reorganisation, which is the second point of this, prior to the general election, I wouldn't have seen that there would have been that many benefits on the table for this. As councillors around the table have described, in Torbay, I think we're doing a very good job. I can identify where the administrative boundaries are, for example, because it's where the potholes start. If you're on your way out of Torbay, either going towards the South Hams or Teambridge. To me, I'm very proud of my Swissco team because I'm able to do that. And it's really, as soon as the government's housing targets, moving from an advisory system where there was an advisory starting point to a mandatory target. And the mandatory target for Torbay created a situation where delivering that mandatory target for 14 years, over a 14-year period, would see us having a very different Torbay, where we would, in order to meet that target over a 14-year period, we would be required to build on every single area of green space, whether it's a farmer's field, a golf course, a football pitch, a play park. That's the scale of development that would be required. And where does that come from, councillors? That comes from the fact that places like Torbay, Teambridge and the South Hams have relatively similar populations, but Torbay has 1/10 of the land area, and the government target is largely based off population. Now, look at a situation where there was wider regional planning, and all of a sudden you have the opportunity to create new areas, such as, say, Cranbrook or Sherford. Now, what those have done for areas in their localities is they've created situations where, say, for an example of a development that I'm aware of in Tipton St John, in our council, we see a great success if we get 30% delivery of affordable housing. If you were to look at developments in that area, you would see 200% affordable housing, because for every one open market house, there were 2 affordable houses created. Now, that sort of step change is possible because East Devon in that area had the benefit of Cranbrook, where there was a new town being created. And so there are things around the table, like affordable housing, where, yes, prior to the election, would any of this have been attractive? No. It's been created by government, but equally at the same time, there are certain situations that the status quo is changed by government. So I can see out of this opportunities for Torbay to do relatively well. We talked earlier about, I think one of my colleagues mentioned financial position. If you look at the financial position of Torbay, Torbay's financial position is very good. looking round at a district and also at a county level, is that necessarily the case? Torbay's position in relation to the setup we've got on the adult social care settlement and the way we work with the primary care trust, that's a much more innovative arrangement which is delivering much greater value for money. Is that the same setup in other locations? I don't think it is. Equally, what's the performance of our hard-working staff in children's services? So I can see how, from a negotiation perspective, there are things where Torbay could benefit, and there are things where our neighbours could benefit as well. So would it, in an ideal situation, we'd be doing any of this? Not really. But actually, can I see how there could be positive outcomes coming from what we've been told by government we've got to do and we've got no choice but to participate in? Yes, Chair, I can. But clearly, the answers to what the best arrangement is, which is where we started from, that evidence-led approach that the paper explains that you described and that I think there's been around the table consensus on, it seems the most appropriate way to go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And absolutely, there does seem to be confusion that these are two separate items. And I think almost it would be best to have two separate discussions and two separate debates. So as we get now towards the votes, I'm going to split it. Number one, and the first recommendation refers to devolution and potentially setting up a combined mayoral authority with Cornwall, Plymouth, Devon and ourselves. That is something completely different to local government reorganisation. As we've had the debate tonight, and as I have reflected, and as you spoke so eloquently right at the start, the government has made it very, very clear that you're only going to get devolution max with the funds and with the powers if you adopt the mayoral model, the mayoral combined authority metro. I think about Andy Streeter in the West Midlands. People talk about Andy Burnham, but there have been other successes with their powers and devolution over a larger area than just one council. And it seems to me that that is the most important thing to put our colours to the mast. I've looked at the recommendation, but as the debate has gone on, it almost feels to me as though it could be refined, but I think nothing is set in stone, and this is an intent. So we would like to be a combined mayoral authority for the purposes of devolution with Cornwall, Plymouth, Devon and ourselves to get the maximum devolution power and funding and to bring to a local level those things that are now administered by government. But the key thing is not that we're in with Cornwall or who we're in with, but to achieve that is to be a mayoral authority. And I wonder whether it could be refined or it could be in the back of people's minds that is that adopting the mayoral model is the way forward, even if, for example, Cornwall were to decide they didn't want to be a part of it. Surely, when you were speaking so eloquently, it must be the back of your mind that we should be talking with our friends at Devon, with whom we've already entered into an agreement, and hopefully extending that agreement to Plymouth and who knows elsewhere in the other direction to have a mayoral model to get the maximum devolution. That seems to me to be the first point. But I will support the recommendation because it's rather late in the evening. We don't want to start redrafting. But it seems that that is the key, rather than who our partners are, but that we take the opportunity of maximum devolution. Then the second is the local government reorganisation, absolutely to have an evidence-based approach. But there seems a tremendous irony that as Torbay has got its act together after 20-something years as a unitary authority, we can hold our heads up high and say we are good in children's services, and absolutely we have integrated health and social care that is nationally regarded as a model of good practice, although so often taken for granted at the local level. Someone is suggesting that we are swept away, and there is an irony that we've got our act together and yet we now face an uncertain future. So on this second separate issue of the local government reorganisation, as well as having an evidence-based approach, I would suggest that we look at it with certain things in mind, not least what is best for the residents of Torbay. And number one, we must be allowed to continue to do well what we do best. And I think particularly in terms of integrated health and social care, I would be appalled if that was swept away because a wider Devon, unitary or whatever, the health sector thought they couldn't manage integrated care over a much larger geographic area. I think it has to be new councils and a new approach with new councils. So some of the language tonight, you know, it's not the Torbay Raj and it's not the Devon Raj that we get swallowed up by Devon and Devon's, which I think is causing upset amongst the districts. And I think we would cause upset amongst some of our neighbours if it was thought to be a Torbay takeover. I think it has to be genuinely new unitary councils, not existing councils swallowing up neighbours or swallowing up, in the case of Devon, the districts. There has to be a new start, a fresh start. And then I think finally, for it to work, and this comes back to the evidence-based approach, which I absolutely support, I think areas of a similar character are likely to work together most effectively rather than dissimilar areas. And if you look at the map of Devon, it seems to me very clearly to build up into the hundreds of thousands, there are the urban areas, the engines of economic growth, I would say, the prosperous parts, and I think that we would wish to link with those. And there are the picturesque parts that may be to the west and to the north, where I think we have less in common. But that probably is a debate for another day. So I will support this. Waffled on too long. I'm sorry if I've done that. The first thing, it's about getting maximum devolution and sitting down with government. He who pays the piper calls the tune, and if the mayoral model is what's required, that is what we should support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, and you are right. And I think, oh, my apologies, I will come back to you. You are right in as much as these are two separate issues. They're wrapped together in one English devolution white paper. And because they do this throughout the whole of the document, which has caused lots and lots of confusion. If they were like that, and even the dates that are included are like that, and even on the webinars, civil servants and occasionally the minister has got those dates intertwined, and it's only been on the report that's come forward in the written word after the meeting where it's been clarified. So I do agree, it is extremely confusing. Councillor Tranter, last but certainly not least.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to briefly add that I think this is a real difficult time with all the if, buts and maybes and what could happen and what might happen. I think it feels quite an unsettled and highly pressurised time. And I think for Torbay, we've got such great things about Torbay that happen. And my concern is that we may get absorbed and all the good positive things that we've achieved get diluted. And I think it's important as well that we talk about taking people on the journey, but none of us bought a ticket for this ride, and the residents certainly didn't. So I think it's really important to get some really simple comms out there and take people on this journey and let them know that this is. I've always worked in a way where you don't do to, you work with and for, and I feel like this is being done to us, and I think the residents need to know that as well, that we are working within these guidelines that we've been given, that we didn't ask for, and yeah, I just think, feel it's important to make the whole community know what's actually going on and how this is all working behind the scenes, and that we haven't said, oh, what, this is a great idea, let's do this.
Thank you very much indeed. And I did say I would leave the best till last. There was a little bit of a sound about not buying a ticket for the ride, and I saw a number of pens quickly write that one down. So don't be surprised if that one features in a few prominent newspapers next week. Okay. Thank you very much. Seriously, thank you to all the members who turned up this evening, and thank you for the debate. It's been extremely helpful, and the most important thing is, you know, there is much more that unites each and every one of us in this room, in this journey moving forward, than divides us. I need to go to the vote. You thought I'd forgotten? So we will move to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you, and that is unanimous. And where we are, 7:10. Thank you very much indeed. The meeting is closed.